Hey guys, Kosti here, and what I want to do for this video is talk about some of the most overrated chess books. Now, I want to make it really clear right up top. I actually quite like some of these books. I just don't think they're necessarily the best use of time for someone who's interested mainly in chess improvement. Which I think is the majority of this channel. So if you're interested in just overall becoming a better chess player, then yeah, some of these books I think are not going to be right for you. So the first book on my list is a really well-known book, Bobby Fischer Teaches Chess. And the publishers of this book make it seem like this is like Bobby Fischer's like personal chess diary. like this is Bobby Fischer teaching you how to play chess like Bobby Fischer, and that just couldn't be any further from the truth. Fischer did not write this book. He simply lent his name to it, and I think it's a relatively okay book for beginners, but it's certainly not the first book I would recommend for anyone. If you want to truly learn how Bobby Fischer played chess, I would suggest reading the book that he actually wrote, My 60 Memorable Games. Which of course is detailed annotations of some of his best games that he ever played against some of the world's greatest players, world champions, and it's actually an insightful look into his thought process and how he approached the game. For players just starting out who are looking for something more for beginners, I really like this book, The Soviet Chess Primer by Ilya Mosenfelder. This is a book that is well known. This is one of the first books that world champions Kasparov and Karpov read when they were younger, and I really like this book overall. It covers all of the rules, all of the basics and fundamentals, how to approach the different parts of the game, the opening, the middle game, the end game, how to calculate lines, how to spot quick tactics, basically everything you could ask for introductory chess book. So I really like this book. The one drawback I would say is that it doesn't have a ton of tactical puzzles. Which I know for many beginners, this is one of the most important things you should be doing, is trying to solve a lot of tactics. So what I would suggest is supplementing the book with some kind of puzzle book. A series of puzzle books I really like are the new books by Susan Polgar, titled Learn Chess the Right Way. This is book one, which is about must-know checkmates, checkmate patterns, mate in one, mate in two combinations. Book two is about winning material, so this covers basic tactics, pins, forks, skewers, pretty much all of the standard tactics that you need to learn when you're just starting out. Each of these books I think has around 500 problems, so a ton of material. The problems are really thematic and useful, and yeah, for beginners I think this series, and there's a total of 5 books, is really great. The next book I think is pretty overrated is the classic My System by Aaron Nimzowitsch. Nimzowitsch was one of the greatest players in the early 20th century, and he was really a revolutionary player. And when he wrote his book, My System, he really introduced a lot of ideas that were considered somewhat new, somewhat provocative, and went against the grain of typical chess understanding around that time. However, that book still was written a long time ago, and so I think it's a good book if you're interested in, let's say, seeing how chess players from that era approached the game, what kind of ideas they were exploring. So if it's from more of a historical perspective, then I think it's a really interesting book and a must-read for any player interested in chess history. But if your goal is to just get good at the game, a much better book I would suggest is pretty obvious choice actually, Secrets of Modern Chess Strategy by I. M. John Watson. The subtitle here is Advances Since Nimzowitsch, and basically this is an amazing book. What Watson does is he goes over some of the lessons that Nimzowitsch was talking about in his book My System, things like overprotection and prophylaxis and all this stuff, and he gives a modern update, how those ideas have advanced since the 1910s, 1920s, and how more modern grandmasters treat the game of chess, the idea of dynamics versus strategy and all that stuff. It's not a super recent book. It was written just about 20 years ago, but I think a lot of the material here is still very relevant for players interested in chess strategy. The next book, I'm probably going to get a lot of heat for this one that I feel like is overrated. Again, a pretty good book. Is How to Reassess Your Chess by I. M. Jeremy Silman. Okay, I really like the book. It's a huge book. It covers a bunch of very fundamental ideas about positional chess, and in particular, Silman's approach is by talking about the imbalances of the game, things like king safety, pawn structure, piece placement, again, dynamics versus strategy, the role of initiative, material imbalances. There's a ton of excellent material in here, and I do recommend people read the book, but people act like this book is the only book that you should read if you're interested in positional chess, or people act like this is one of the absolute greatest chess books of all time, and I just don't think that's necessarily true. I think it's a very, very good book, but this is by no means the only book you should be reading if your goal is to get to somewhere like 2000, 2200. So in addition to this book, a couple of books that I would recommend. Number one, Mastering Chess Strategy by Johann Hellstein. I think this is a fantastic book. It's got hundreds and hundreds of examples here of, again, different positional ideas, how to play against weaknesses, how to improve your pieces, prophylaxis, basically everything you could be looking for, and a ton of exercises. Overall, I think there's actually more content in this book than the Silman book. Silman, if you're familiar with his style, he definitely likes to write a lot and include a lot of prose with his examples. So this book, I think, has a lot more chess content. That said, I mean, if you're an ambitious player, I think you should just read both. Another one that's a personal favorite of mine is the Positional Chess Handbook by Israel Gelfer. It's a small book, but I think there's something like 450, 500 examples in here as well. Really, really useful stuff, covers basically all aspects of the middle game, and it goes over a lot of end games as well. Okay, so the final book that I believe is overrated, I think I'm going to take a lot of heat for this one too, is the well-known Dvoretsky's Endgame Manual. This is also the 4th edition. Now again, this is actually a great book, and I think if you're 2200 and up, then this book is pretty much required reading if you're interested in becoming a title player, international master, grandmaster. That said, I've seen so many players pick up this book and buy this book and start going through the book that, in my opinion, are nowhere near ready to read it. The book does go over some basic endgames, things like the Lucena position, the Philidor position, some of these basic endgames that really everyone should know. But it also gets into a lot of really advanced stuff, really technical stuff, all the way up to like grandmaster level endgame studies. And so I feel like the book overall is just going to be extremely overwhelming for a player who just wants to learn the basic endgames. Instead, a couple of books I think you should check out for learning theoretical endgames. Number one is Silman's Complete Endgame course. So I do like Silman overall as an author. I think his endgame book is really, really great for players up to 2200, covering all of the most important theoretical endgames. And another book I really like is 100 Endgames You Must Know by De La Villa. This is a book that, well, like the title says, covers some of the most important theoretical endgames. I'm currently going through the book on Chessable, which I really like for that format. A lot of people have the physical book that they enjoy as well. And I think if you're interested in learning some theoretical endgames, I would strongly, strongly recommend going through those two books first. That are a little bit more basic and fundamental before working your way up to the tougher stuff in Dvoretsky. A couple more endgame books that I really like. They don't really cover theoretical endgames so much as endgame strategy, how to play in the endgame and take the right approach. The first book is a really well-known classic book by Shereshevsky, Endgame Strategy. Although I did hear a rumor that this book actually contains a lot of material that comes from Dvoretsky himself. So I just thought I should mention that. Another book I really like for the endgame is by an author I mentioned previously, Johann Hellstein. He has another book called Mastering Endgame Strategy. Again, ton of examples, ton of exercises, very, very useful thematic stuff. I've tried to go through as much of the book as I can. I often use it for my lessons, and I think it's just an absolutely essential book for anyone trying to master their endgame play. So basically, I would suggest reading those 4 books first, and once you get through those 4 books, then go for Dvoretsky's Endgame Manual and try to go through it. His analytical manual I haven't read too much of. I started going through a little bit, but it was basically just way too complicated. I would suggest almost any other tactics or calculation book if you're trying to improve your analytical abilities. One book I'll kind of drop in as a dishonorable mention is Alexander Kotov's Think Like a Grandmaster. This is another really well-known book that receives a lot of hype. I think it basically just has an excellent name. Everyone wants to learn how to think like a grandmaster. Overall, I do like the book. It has a lot of really useful games and examples in there, again, talking about positional chess and strategy. The reason that a lot of people think this book is not exactly the best book for everybody is because the thinking method that Kotov describes, the so-called tree of variations, in terms of the calculation process, is just not really realistic. Just to paraphrase briefly, what Kotov basically recommends is this idea of when you're calculating in a position, you should first select your candidate moves, 1, 2, 3, 4. Start analyzing candidate move number 1. Identify candidate moves for your opponent, 1, 2, 3. Start with number 1, analyze that. Then go on to number 2, analyze that, number 3. And then going back to your second candidate move, your third, your fourth, and so on. And this highly structured way of thinking is, as most serious chess players will tell you, is just not really how it works when you're actually sitting down at the chessboard and you're actually calculating yourself. The human brain likes to jump around a lot. You might look at different variations. It's rarely structured. Now, that's not necessarily the best way to go about it. I actually do believe in trying to structure your thought process at least somewhat, but the way Kotov describes it in his book is a little bit too schematic, and it's just not practical for most players. I didn't want to include it with the rest of these books because, again, overall I think there's a ton of useful stuff in there, and in general these Soviet chess books are really useful, but I thought I should mention that one as a lot of people do believe that book is overrated. Alright guys, that wraps it up for this video. If you think there are any books that I missed, please let me know in the comments below. And if you have a different opinion, if you really enjoy one of the books that I mentioned, then I'd be happy to hear your perspective. So please let me know as well. Alright guys, if you liked the video, please do leave a thumbs up on it. It really does help with the YouTube algorithm or whatever. And yeah, I'll catch you next time. Take care.